Misa proposed that the Senate give immediately emergency powers to the Supreme Chancellor.
Hello and welcome back to Unlimited Limited, the show where we work together to get better at Limited in Star Wars Unlimited. And now, with a new camera angle. Wow. So, I went to the Enumclaw PQ this past weekend, the limited one, and it was a ton of fun. So mostly, I'm really just excited to talk about the experiences I had there and how they may inform future limited PQs that I attend, of which there is at least one for this set, so looking forward to that. So first of all, just wanted to shout out the Enumclaw PQ. It was very well organized. The last limited PQ I went to, which was in Bothell, I believe, it was a great time. It was super fun, but one thing at the beginning that I heard some criticism about was that the process of actually opening the packs is very long, and that is true, it is. And I recall at the time I applauded that process because it's also a very good anti-cheat method, right? The way it worked, in summary, if you don't know, is you were randomly sat across from somebody by the tournament organizers, and you open your packs and they open their packs, and then you exchange pools and write down everything in the pool. That way you can't come in with like extra cards in your pocket and just add them into your pool and claim that you opened them, because the person sitting across from you watched you do it and recorded everything by hand. And this process was, I applaud them entirely. This is a very robust anti-cheat method. However, it does take a long time to do. So at this PQ, what they ended up doing was they actually, and I have no idea how long this took, so massive shout out to the tournament organizers and the judges that did this. They opened all 64 sealed pools ahead of time and actually filled out the sheet on our behalf before we even got there, and then wrapped the sealed pool in that sheet and then just distributed those randomly. So that way, once again, there was no sort of way that you could come in with extra cards and add them to your sealed pool, because they were all already on there and presumably recorded elsewhere as well. And it also saved the time of sitting across from someone and opening all of your packs and watching them open all of their packs and, recording all of that. So massive shout out, although I'm sure that took a very, very long time for them. So I'm not sure what future PQs will be doing. I guess FFG leaves it up to the tournament organizers for these anti-cheating methods, because I think both of them so far have been good. So we'll see what continues there. So the PQ itself, very well streamlined. There was very little downtime between rounds. Things just kind of got moving. After lunch, things were back on time. It was, very well organized. The judges were great. And the venue was great. Yeah, no complaints with how yesterday's PQ was run. It was absolutely fantastic. I've honestly I don't even know why I'm saying, oh, no complaints, like it's a surprise. I think every PQ I've been to so far has been, it's been well run. So that continues. So you guys are here, presumably, for my beautiful face and to talk about strategies. So let's get into it. What did I do? Well, I did what the limited pool I got wanted me to do, which was to play Leia Green. And just to be clear, I'm happy to play Leia Green, as we'll talk about later. I think that she is the best leader for limited in the set, and green is maybe the best color to pair with her, although yellow is also very good, and so is red. There's really no wrong way to do Leia, and if there is a wrong way to do Leia, it's probably the way that I did it. Again, mercy of my sealed pool, but as you'll see whenever we go through each card, it's not pretty. It's not terrible. I've had worse, for sure, but seal this would seal this. You make the most with what you got. All right, so let's get into the list. So starting off here, C-3PO, actually very good in Leia. So one thing that is, I guess, the best part about running Leia yellow is that you have access to some good one-drops. And it's kind of like Snoke in the previous set, where one-drops, typically in limited, right, you try to avoid playing one-drops, because on turn one, you're very rarely going to be going one-drop, and have that be actually, beneficial to you, let alone even have that happen at all, right? Whereas that can be good and constructed in the right context. In limited, you may as well play a 2-drop on turn one for the most part. But in Leia, and last set Snoke, that's not always true, right? C-3PO being a 2-4 with, I guess, upside is pretty good. A 2-4 in limited for 2 resources is good. Now, of course, this also loses you the initiative pretty much every time, right? Because even if you go into it with the initiative, you go 1-drop, they play their 2-drop, you do the Leia activation, they get initiative, sure, whatever. But honestly, this was very good, especially in a format with a bunch of 3/3s that people can play on turn one. It's really nice to have a 2-4 that next turn can be threatened to turn into a 3-5 and trade into that. So a lot of good. C3PO is actually very, very good in the Leia deck. I'm not sure anywhere else really, but I mean the Leia deck, as we'll talk about, it's what you're going to want to be in pretty often. So if you can. So definitely high on C3PO, and I do regret that I couldn't play more 1-drops. It's just this and Nimble Prowess. So Nimble Prowess also, I remember during the set review, so I'm skeptical about upgrades typically in Limited because they're really easy to get 2 for 1. But I remember in the set review, I was talking about how Nimble Prowess is actually pretty good. You know, it comes down and even in the worst case scenario where your opponent can instantly remove it, you still got some when played value. And most of the time, because removal is pretty sparse these days in Limited, they won't be able to remove it right away. And +1/+1 is a real buff. I mean, that's what you get for Leia's activation for the same resource cost. But this comes in with another a little bonus to it. So I like this card a lot. It was good in Leia. It's good anywhere else too. You know, if worst case scenario, you put this on your turn 1 play, exhaust their turn 1 play, and then you have to activate, and then you can activate Leia and give your turn 1 play +2/+2. You know, that's not a great line. You want to add to the board a little more than that, but this sort of allows for some bigger units to come down and be pretty nice and trade quite favorably. So, late game, this is also fine because, you know, they have a big board, you have a big board, you play this on something which maybe changes the math and also taps down their only attacker that might have been able to get through whatever sentinel you had or some big unit. Yeah, Nimble Prowess is actually probably a bit better than I gave it credit for at the set review. And I remember I actually overheard at the PQ, I wasn't part of this conversation or anything, but I overheard some people talking about, wow, Nimble Prowess, word on the street is it's really good, and they are correct. Word on the street, word on the Cole Street Games, where the PQ was that Nimble Prowess is good, and that word is correct. So you should probably, don't play this out, it's not like out of aspect good, but anytime you can get it, honestly, I would suggest throwing this in your deck. It's just nice. It taps down leaders too, that is very relevant. And it can go on ships, also good. Next we have Chandlerland Sponsor. We don't need to really spend too much time talking about this. We know this card is good. I will say this card loses a tiny bit of value because it is a 2/3 in a format where there's 2 3/3s at common at the same cost. So if you're not on the initiative, now if you're on the initiative, you can mitigate that by having Leia activation, turn this into a 3/4, and then you're good. And then even if they hit base, you can just go kill their 3/3. Oh, now your base only took 1 damage on it. You still have Chandlerland Sponsor around, right? Yeah, this card's nuts, but obviously if you're not on the play, it is a decent amount worse with all these 3/3s going around. But I'm not going to spend too much time talking about this. We all know it's good. Next we have Diplomatic Envoy. I think I played this card a couple of times, 2 or 3 maybe. I only ever did the disclose thing once. This card's not great, obviously. We kind of know that a 2/2 for 2 isn't cutting it these days. And the ability is definitely strong, don't get me wrong, but it kind of says play 2 behind curve and get an ambush unit. And that can be good. I mean, we know how good ambush is in Limited, which is part of the reason why this deck didn't do well. As you'll see in a minute, there are no ambush units in this deck, unless you count whatever Diplomatic Envoy does. But no, I think in general you should avoid playing this unit. The only real upside that I can even conceivably think of is people do kind of ignore space in this set. So, you know, in Leia, this could be kind of a scary attacker at some point, but that's something that can be said about so many better ships than this. So I think you really shouldn't be considering Diplomatic Envoy unless you really need a 2 or you somehow think you're going to be able to get this ambush thing off. Gonk Power Droid, similar in a sense to Chandlerland Sponsor, it is a little scary to play this on one, or to keep this in your opening hand if you're not going first, because if your opponent just, again, slams one of those 3/3s, you're SOL, right? If you're going second, and your only turn 1 play is Gonk Droid. Now, if you're on the play, this card gets a lot better, because even if your opponent can immediately kill it, you still are going to get an activation and going to hopefully be able to play a 4-drop. So, a 4-drop. So if you are putting this card in your deck, I would suggest having some 4-drops that you can sort of capitalize on that from. This deck did not have a ton of that, so I was lucky in that I never really got directly challenged on the ground with 3/3s when I played this. So I could get in maybe a couple turns in a row and play a 5-drop on the following turn. So Yeah, Gonk Droid is good. It is a scary turn 1 play, but also it's kind of scary for both players, right? Because the stats are just not good. Now again, if you're on the play, Leia makes it a 2/4, that's cool. So one thing you can do with Gonk Droid, specifically in Leia, that's really good, is especially if you're on the play, but even if you're not, if they can't immediately kill it, you can go Gonk Droid, and then next turn you can put an experience counter on Gonk Droid with Leia's ability, and then get in and either kill their X2 that they played last turn, or just do 2 to base, and then you can still play a 3-drop. That's something I did pretty often, actually, and so that's really nice. It's probably not quite as good as going Gonk attack, play a 4-drop, but it's still quite good. And yeah, maybe sometimes it's better, but yeah, this little guy, scary experience for both players for sure. Next is High Command Counselor, and I have ASP Laborer beside, and that's because if you look at my deck list, it's actually registered as ASP Laborer, but I realized immediately after submitting my deck list that I don't really think that's right, and I probably should be playing this instead. I don't think I'm ever playing both. My deck has, I mean, if I didn't have enough 2s, I would play both, but my deck has enough 2s. So after game 1 every game, I just took this out and put this in, and it was that was actually, spoilers, the only sideboard I did all day was taking out ASP Laborer, putting in High Command Counselor, and I did that every game. And then I always had to remember to de-sideboard after, despite the fact it's, basically the same card. I don't think that either card is amazing. I think that this one is maybe a little bit better most of the time, but I could be convinced otherwise in some matchups. My official count is high enough that I think this just gets that equity, but they're both just fine. Next, we have Inspector's Shuttle, which is the 1/3 where if you name a card and you get it right out of their hand, you get an experience counter, which is cool. I usually wasn't playing this blind. You can usually get the experience counter unless you play this straight up on turn 1. And then it's a 2-cost 2/4, which is fine, I guess, in space. There's just so much disclose going on, especially, I mean, the best leader is Leia, and Leia's disclosing all the time. So if they do that, you can just do this, and it's okay. It's still not great. This was kind of a reluctant include. I only blind named once, I think, and I got it wrong. I named the green 3/3, and he had the red 3/3. So I named the wrong 3/3, but that's okay. Next was Jar Jar Binks, which we all know this card is good. I think it's seeing some constructed play. Don't quote me on that, though. It just kind of allowed, it didn't really have any special synergy with Leia other than making her, keyword big. I guess the benefit that you had was that you could trade it into their Leia right away, right? Because you flip Leia, she's a 4/7, and then you plot out Jar Jar, and now she's a 6/9, and then you attack with Leia, disclose, buff Leia, and she's hitting for 7, which kills their Leia. I never had that happen, but that's the best case, the synergy I can think of here. In general, I don't think it's that good. I guess it is just a green pip, so if you draw it in hand later and you need something to disclose with Leia, to put experience on Leia, you can do that. But yeah, card's good, but there's nothing special with Leia here. Now, Lost Jedi is something that I was kind of expecting to do a little bit better than it did. It is a 1/3 with grit for 2, which is not a particularly impressive stat line, but with a stat line like that, it's very clear that what they want you to do here is to buff this card up. Grit is a powerful keyword on a unit with a lot of attack or a lot of HP, right? And you can give this a lot of HP with Leia. So I figured it would be a little bit better than it was. It was always a little bit clunky. They're always either able to kill it right away, or I would have to make kind of a slightly unfortunate trade with it. I had buffed it once and I was getting ready to do it again, but I realized, oh man, I really have to kill that unit that they have, and I just get into it for 2 or whatever, and that's it. Maybe that's just a bit results oriented, but it kind of left a bit of a sour taste in my mouth after the PQ. I don't think not that I wanted to play 2 copies of this, that's just what my sealed pool was. I kind of knew this card wasn't amazing, but I expected a little bit more from it than what it gave me. That being said, it's a 2, it's a fine 2. It is always risky playing 1/3s or 2/3s, especially 1/3s though, in this format, because you're always at the risk of going second and having your opponent play a 3/3, and then this is just your only 2. That's a really bad spot to be in. So I like the 3Xs a lot better as 2-drops, but this is, sometimes you just got to do it. Next we have Armor of Fortune. This is, I think I played this once, and I don't think it was actually out of plot. It makes your leader big, hard to kill, with the exception of retaliation, I guess. But honestly, I just, nothing really to say about this. It was fine. Diplomatic Immunity, on the other hand, this card is very strong, and I think we all kind of knew that when this unit is attacked doesn't really come up all that often. I don't think it ever came up for me. I think my opponent actually played one time as if I did have it, and I did not. Like, they didn't attack into a unit that had this on it, where I figured for sure they would. But in their defense, if I did have it, it would have been a very bad attack for them. So they didn't, and I was happy about it. But generally, I think that you just kind of, unless your opponent has like a lot of cards in hand, you kind of just assume that they don't have the, when this unit is attacked, double vigilance, double heroism to disclose. But still, 2 for +2/+2 in a format where there's like very little removal is very good, especially if you stick this on a leader. But oftentimes what I found myself doing was sticking this on a space unit to close out games, right? Like I said, people kind of ignore the space arena in this set, and that is sometimes right to do. That's not necessarily a criticism, but as a result, you can sometimes kind of exploit that. And a card like Diplomatic Immunity, which can go on a space unit, does do that. So I think this card is quite good, even if you're never getting off the Disclose. And I'm happy to put this in any future deck. Beloved Order, this card was fine. Nothing really to say. There wasn't really any Leia synergy. It was nice to make 2 bodies with it, because I have a Crucible in this deck, so that was extra value for that. But in general, it's just fine. Next, we had Crate Veteran, 2 copies of it in the deck. This card was awesome. It traded really well. Up. It does trade down, so you have to be careful about that. You have to hold it until after they play their or attack with their 3/3, which was often first action of the turn, right? Then you can play this and grab initiative. Maybe you miss out attacking with like your 2/3 or your 1/4 or something, but then next turn right away you put an experience on this. Now it's a 5/4. And it kills their 3/3 and sticks around and is a real scary threat. Or you just start going base with it, right? This card was awesome. I was really happy to have 2 copies of it. And I often found myself struggling to figure out whether to play it or the next card, Darrow Commando, which is a 3/4 Overwhelm for 3. Also great. This has kind of a little bit of additional upside in that it kills 3/3s that they may have played last turn. But also, it doesn't hit quite as hard. So there's a bit of a trade-off there in terms of, was I going to be racing base? Was I going to be trying to do beatdown stuff? Or was I going to be controlling the board a bit? So both of these were great. I always was super happy to see them in my opening hand, because I knew my turn 2 at least would be pretty solid, especially if I drew Gonk Droid, because attack Gonk Droid, play one of these for 2, and then buff it, like Crate, right? That's amazing. Yeah, so both of these are awesome. They kind of come into the same space in my mind where they're just efficient 3-cost units that I'm always happy to have. Next one is Defense Fleet X-Wing, which I actually think is the only card in the deck that I did not play one time. This was always a resource, and I knew it wasn't great, but it even kind of underperformed from my expectations. I think if any of my opponents were doing like more spacey things, it maybe would have been a bit better. Because if you start buffing it with Leia, right, it can trade reasonably well, or not trade, but eat reasonably well. There's like smaller swarm space units like A-Wing. There's also a Saboteur space unit at common that can kind of get through this, so it's a little bit awkward there. Yeah, all in all, it never really was what I wanted when I drew it, and I don't even think there was ever a spot where I was like, man, I wish I could draw Defense Fleet X-Wing right now. That was never really in my mind. I just resourced this every time. And honestly, in hindsight, I probably should have considered cutting it for something else. But next up is Senator Chuchi, which we all know is a fantastic card, right? It's the 3-cost 2/5 Restore 1 that gives an official Restore 2 on attack. This basically single-handedly won me a Yularen Red matchup, because I would put this on either on attack on Leia or on Chandrillin Sponsored. That's what the card's called, right? Yeah, Chandrillin Sponsors. And it's just Restore 5 with 2 actions, and there's not really an aggro deck in the draft format that can deal with Restore 5 every turn, right? It's just not really doable. Yeah, card's amazing, and we all kind of already know that. It's great with Leia, too, because a 2/5 is already kind of unkillable. If you're able to make it like a 3/6, yeah, no, that's just tough. Most leaders can't even kill a 3/6. So yeah, Senator Chuchi is incredible, and but we kind of all already knew that. Next is Beguile, which was my one out of aspect card. So someone wrote to me on Blue Sky like a month or 2 ago, and suggested that running Beguile out of Aspect was actually really, really good, and that they were running, I think, of multiple copies and to give it a try. So this was in their honor, and it turns out they were correct. Yeah, this card is awesome. And I kind of had whispers of that ahead of time. My team and I were chatting a bit about the draft stuff, and we did a practice draft, and we were talking about Beguile, and everyone kind of came to the conclusion independently that yeah, this is worth running out of Aspect. So congrats, Blue Sky user, you were ahead of the curve by months. But yes, no, we've all caught up to we're all catching up to your genius now. And yes, Beguile is indeed very, very, very solid out of Aspect. So looking at your opponent's hand, obviously, is better to do in decks with something like Garundan, right? But honestly, that's not nothing. But most of the time, you can really just think of this like Waylay, because that's kind of what it is. And Waylay for 5. The reason I wasn't sort of immediately on Beguile was because Waylay for 5 really didn't appeal to me. But it turns out in a format where the removal is really just not good, Waylay for 5 is absolutely worth it. Plus that little additional upside of looking at their hand is nice. So definitely recommend Beguile. Also, another thing that's important to know is it is also kind of a bit of a meta call. It's good into Leia, because Leia can no longer buff up one unit to be really scary without the fear of Beguile. There's also a card, I think it's called Emergency Powers, where you pay 1 and exhaust however many resources you want, and then put that many experience counters on a unit. That card is really good. A non-leader unit. That card is really good and will kind of win games right away in a format where removal is bad. And Beguile just completely hoses that card. They dump 6-7 resources into their emergency powers, and you just Beguile. Like, even if you're playing this out of Aspect, that's still great. Whereas if you didn't have Beguile there, they're probably going to swing for like 9 or 10 damage, and that could very well close the game. So yeah, definitely highly recommend putting this out of Aspect. I don't know if there's a single deck I wouldn't play Beguile in. Even some like hyper fast aggro thing, maybe it's a little less good there. But yeah, no, I think this card is fantastic. Obviously, if you can play for 3, it's just never cuttable, right? But even 5, I think most of the time you're still running it. Knowledge and Defense, on the other hand, is not amazing. It's still fine. Again, in a format where there isn't really much removal, sometimes you have to cope with the sort of medium removal. And the fact this draws a card is nice. The fact this hampers attack as well is nice, right? You can shrink something before you attack, so your unit takes less back. Now that's always risky because that gives them a chance to interact, but sometimes that's right to do. You can use this to finish off like a leader if the math didn't quite work out for you. It's okay. It's versatile. It goes across arenas, but yeah, it's not fantastic. And this actually is kind of, whereas Beguile was very good in Leia, this is kind of a little worse in Leia, because -2/-2 means a lot less when you can buff your units, right? So still a fine card, not bad at all, but not great either. All right. Bardotin Ornithopter. This one is fine. I was pretty much always able to disclose the blue in this deck, but sometimes you won't, and then it'll feel kind of bad. If you can, it feels okay. There's nothing really that exciting about this other than the fact, again, it's another space unit in a format where those are often ignored. So if you play this into space, get a couple of Leia activations onto it, it can be a real threat. But that's really all I have to talk about that. Grassroots Resistance is 4-cost Lightning Helix if you're a Magic player. And in Magic, Lightning Helix, as you know, is a good card, but it also costs 2, right? So paying 4 for it in Magic would not be good enough, it turns out. Is it good enough in SWU? So my team has been skeptical of this card, and I completely understand why. It is very expensive. I think I am a little bit higher on it than most of them are, but I definitely understand the sentiment. I think that if I were playing this in a set where the removal was better, I would not be interested in an effect like this. But again, in a set where there's like the removal is just not there, you kind of have to play what you can get. And this was, I'll say it, first time ever, I'm going to compliment this card, was actively good into aggro decks like Yularen Red, which is, I think, the one like aggro deck I played at the PQ, or I played against. The 3 is so nice, as any Data Vault player knows, and 3 damage can usually not trade up, but it can usually finish off a leader. 3 is a pretty big breaking point. A leader like Yularen, I believe, has 6 HP, and there's a lot of 3 attack units. There's a lot more if you're playing Leia, because now 2 attack units are 3 attack units. And then you get to do grassroots resistance to finish off the leader. And sure, that's like a little inefficient, absolutely, but inefficiently killing a leader is still killing a leader. There was also a 5/3 space unit, and this was obviously pretty much the best possible answer to that. I did that a couple of times, and it felt incredible each time. This card is definitely don't like first pick this card, but don't sleep on it either. This is something that you should be considering in most of your heroism decks, I would say. Unveiled Might, we know is good. If you flip this, put this on Leia, she's a 6/10 that immediately turns into a 7/11. Like, that's obviously that's a difficult thing to deal with whenever the only leader removal is retaliation. Unveiled Might is great. You don't even need to put it on Leia. Oftentimes, what I would do is I would flip Leia, plot out Jar Jar, put Unveiled Might on Jar Jar, use Jar Jar to target Leia. Then I can kill their leader or whatever I need to do with Leia, and I have a relevant unit, right? Jar Jar becomes a 4/4, I guess. Next, we have Consular's Cruiser, which is actually kind of a good space unit. It's kind of a good version of that 1/4. For 2 extra stats, your 1/4 turns into a 4/5. And that actually becomes a real attacker. It becomes a real defender, and I think this unit is quite strong. You can disclose it to buff Leia or all your other blue heroism cards, of which there are a decent amount in this. This card was fantastic. I will absolutely play probably no more than 2 copies of this, but 2 copies I would play for sure. Next is Nalase, which is a card that I still think is good, but I've just never really gotten a showing from. Like, a 5-cost 4/7 is, like, good stats. Like, that's fine. It has a relevant ability sometimes, but, like, Leia can turn it into a 5/8 pretty easily, and that's nice. That's not irrelevant, but there was just never quite a place for Nalase in any of my games. I think I played her once or twice, but it just wasn't really what I was expecting. But I'm interested to hear your experiences if you have Nalase working for you. Next is Raxian Assembly, which is the 5-cost 6/5. This is kind of a breakpoint unit where 5 cost for 6 attack can just like trade with some leaders the turn they come down. This is a very, very efficiently statted unit, and obviously, it's a vanilla. There's not much else to do with it, but when it comes down, it is kind of a must kill because it's either going to kill your opponent's leader or it's going to beat them in the base race every time. So despite being a vanilla, this is a very good unit, and again, I probably don't want to play more than like 2 of them, but if I can get 2 of these in my deck, I'm a happy camper. All right, we're coming up on the last few cards here. Retaliation. This is another one that's kind of, I would just put in a category of like bad removal that you just kind of have to play because removal in this set is just bad. The one use for this, which is actually good, I think, is that it kills Leia. And that feels like you're trading up kind of because Leia is a 6-flip leader. This is 5. So oftentimes my turn looked like, I would flip my Leia, they would flip their Leia, I would activate Leia's ability to buff something, and then they would flip Leia, and then I would flip mine, and then they would, go to base, trying to close out the game, and I would retaliation and then attack and still put a counter on something. So I got 2 counters out of something, and they, I guess, technically got 1, which was converted into a base damage usually, but then they lost their leader. Yeah, retaliation is something that you absolutely need to consider, especially when you're playing a Leia deck that might start to go tall. And just the threat of having that also might make you play differently, like make you more inclined to trade into units rather than to start going base. But I still don't think this is good, and I don't think I would ever play more than 2 copies of this, and even 2 is like ambitious because over the course of a game you're probably only going to actually want 1 copy of this. It's just running 2 for consistency, maybe I could see, but more than that, I'm just not sure. It's just so inefficient, and you need to take base damage in order to use it. Like, because even best case scenario, the one I just described where you're killing Leia, your base is still taking 5, and taking 5 on your base to kill a leader is good, but yeah, your base still does have to take damage. All right, so definitely max 2, but honestly 1 is probably fine. But I do want the first copy, especially for those Leia matches. All right, next is the best card in this deck, which is Crucible. This is the 6-cost 5/5 that when played and when defeated gives an experience counter to each other friendly unit. This card is obviously bonkers. It comes down and Leia is somewhat good at keeping units alive by buffing them, so things stick around a tiny bit longer than you may expect. And then you play this. If you can get even like 2 experience counters off of the when played, it feels great. And I think the when defeated for me only actually came up once because my opponents were just ignoring space so hard. So you might not get experience counters out of that, but what you do get is a 5 attack space unit that's going to start hitting base every turn after it's just helped you gain control of the ground arena by putting all these experience counters on their units. So Crucible's great. I highly recommend it. And if you have 2 Crucibles, then you can get 3 experience counters just with spinning your own wheels. You play one, then you play the other, and you defeat the first one because it is a unique unit, and then it's when defeated triggers, and the when played of the second one triggers. That's 3 experience. Don't do that, but in principle, it's funny, and I guess could be surprise lethal. I only had 1 copy of this, though, sadly. Trust me, I wish I had more copies, but yeah, Crucible's incredible. This is a pack 1, pick 1-able card. The fact it's also not heroism or villainy means that it's just a versatile thing that you can just pack 1, pick 1, and like basically whenever you want. Next is Jade Squadron Patrol, which, other than Crucible, is the best space unit in this deck for sure. Jade Squadron Patrol, just the 6-cost 6/6 Sentinel space unit. It defends space incredibly well. There really aren't a lot of 6-attack space units, so it's pretty much always going to take your opponent 2 hits at least to get through this, which, you know, this does 6 on the crackback. It's pretty much going to guarantee 2 for when your opponent in space. And then if they decide to try to ignore it, it's getting into base for 6 every turn. That's going to close out the game very quickly. They cannot ignore this, and they also can't favorably trade into it. So yeah, Jade Squadron Patrol it's a common. I will highly take these cards, or this card for sure. Now, of course, elephant in the room, this is a space unit in a set where ground is the more important arena. So if you're taking your 6-drop turn off to play this, and your opponents are kind of going to use that to overwhelm you on the ground, then it's not going to feel very good, because you're either not going to be able to attack with this because you need to claim initiative instead of using your action to get into sit for 6, or you are going to get to attack with this, but your opponents are going to have a much quicker clock on the ground because they played that like 7-3 and are now just going to start either cleaning up your units or just start going to base. Yeah, it's definitely a risky play whenever most things are fought on the ground to do this sort of space strategy, but if you can get there, this is the way to do it. And if your opponent their strategy is winning through like space aggro, then forget about it. Their plan is done as soon as you play this, right? Yeah. Highly, highly recommend this card. And finally, Remote Escort Tank. This was fine. Plotted it out. Sometimes it protected my layout. Sometimes it protected something else. Sometimes it saved my base from taking damage in the aggro matchup. It was okay. The fact it only can do Sentinel for this phase was a bit of a problem sometimes, because my opponent would just, they would miss it that turn, but then they would just, okay, I claim initiative, and then next turn they could either finish me off or kill that unit that was a problem for them or whatever. So solid unit still. I think that having 1 copy of it is nice, especially because you can just resource it earlier, and then if you need it for plot, you can get it. That is the deck review, and there is one more thing actually. So sideboard, other than the ASP Laborer I was talking about, the sideboard card Hyperspace Disaster. This was the only like actual sideboard card that I had. I mean, obviously I had my whole pool, but like this was the only one that was ever really a consideration to bring in, and I didn't bring it in once. And that's because the few space units that I had, which was, I don't know, let's count together. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. I had 7 space units. It's actually more than I thought I had. I guess a couple of them I basically never played. But what I'm saying is that, you know, the 7 space units I had were more than enough to dominate the space arena pretty much every time. I was basically never like, oh no, my opponent is going to win in space. That basically never happened. So that just should show you just how infrequent space units are in the set. But it was nice to have it just in case I did run into some kind of crazy space plan. But no, I never ended up putting it in. All right, so let's, I should talk about my record. So I ended up going 3 wins, 1 loss, 2 draws. The draws were very unfortunate. I was very close to winning both of those games when the time was called, but it is what it is. Truly, no one could know which way those games could have gone. Wink, wink. That's okay, though. But I had a good time. The deck was definitely, as you can probably gather by looking at it right now, not particularly amazing. The 3 ones I got, I was pretty happy with. The big things that were missing were the Drizelian Commandos, that ambush unit, and of course that big tank, the 6-7 ambush unit as well. Those were kind of the big things that I think this deck was missing. Maybe also my 2 slot was robust in that it had some good units, but it also had some real unfortunate ones as well. You know, ASP Laborer, 2 copies of Lost Jedi, the Inspector's Shuttle, Diplomatic Envoy. Those are not really 2s that I wanted to run. But the mid game was strong. That's sort of where this deck really, shined. I don't know. Where this deck was good, because you have things like Chuchi, which can sort of stop aggro. You have the Raxian Assembly, the Crucible. If the game didn't go too late, I could usually clean up with sort of my mid game units there, but. Definitely, the other big downside was that there were no 3Xs I could play on turn 1, so if I was ever going second and my opponent had a 3-3, which of course, they're both common, you expect to see that pretty often, I was kind of at a pretty big disadvantage there. So, fun games, but sealed pool gonna sealed pool, so the deck was okay, could have been better, could have been worse, probably like a 5 out of 10. All right, let's talk about the draft, which I did not make, of course, 3, 1, and 2 was not quite enough to get there, but 2 of my team members made it to the draft. Congratulations to both of them. So let's talk about that for a second. So I very quietly and undisturbingly watched my teammates draft from behind. I was just lurking, and I noticed that yellow was very underdrafted. So yellow was going around very late. Good yellow cards were going around very late, not Beguile, because people kind of have figured out that you play that out of Aspect, but a lot of good yellow cards were going very late. And I think that there was a lot of competition, especially over blue heroism for a reason that should be obvious, Leia. And another reason that is substantially less obvious, which we'll talk about in a minute. But yes, so yellow was very, very open. So that's something to keep in mind. Now, is yellow a weak color? I think it is the weakest color. But I don't think it's a weak color. So Legends of the Force, there was this discourse going around that yellow was basically unplayable in Limited, and I disagree with that. It was definitely the weakest color, but I don't think it was unplayable. I think it was just not as good as the other ones. In this set, I think it's closer to as good as the other ones, but still not. I think Legends of the Force yellow was certainly weak. And this is a little bit weak, but not as much. There's still really good yellow. There's, I would say, 2 good yellow leaders in Sabe and Slimemoor. And then Leia Yellow is a very good deck as well. I think there's an argument to be made it's the best version, but I think that you are missing out on a lot of good green. But that is something to keep in mind, that maybe yellow won't be drafted as much as the other colors, so that could be an open lane if you're sitting at a PQ top 8 draft, so just keep that in mind. Now, that being said, if it's equivalently open to something like green, then I'm probably going to be going into green, for sure. So expect some people to force Leia. People get nervous in the top 8 draft, myself included, the time that I was doing it. And they may decide to force a leader that they are comfortable with and they know is good, even if that is not the best leader for them to draft, based on their seating. And if they look around and they see 6 other Leias and they're like, okay, maybe I should be playing some villainy leader instead, right? I think that you should expect people to force it if they are in it. Now, you shouldn't expect everybody to do it, but I think you should expect enough people to do it that should maybe inform your decision making. I'm not saying don't play Leia at top 8. You should if the pool is there. Absolutely, I think it's pretty clearly the best leader in draft, as I've shown graphically by putting a gold medal beside her. It's not so much better that you have to force it. I think you should only be drafting it if it's open. So while Leia is in her own tier, I think there's 4 leaders that are in kind of the tier 2, and all of them are very good and can compete with Leia for different reasons. So Jabba, Yularen, Mon Mothma, and Deidre, I think are all tier 2, and there's that one of those is a little bit contentious, and I'll talk about that. I think Jabba is really good if you can get some Sentinels down, some big Sentinels. That 5/7 green one is incredible with him. The 5/5, I think Cruel Commandos it's called, the 5/5 Sentinel Overwhelm for 5, incredible with Jabba. Anytime you're able to put something on the field where you have Jabba and your opponent can't kill it in one hit, you're probably just going to win that game, right? The amount of value that Jabba's flip can get you if your opponent has to attack into your units, absolutely insane. Even into Leia, especially, now, sorry, I'm talking about this too much, but especially if you have that 6/7 ambusher, right? You run that into Leia, who's maybe buffed herself once or twice, doesn't kill the ambusher, maybe kills Leia if you're lucky, and now you have 6 damage that Jabba's trigger gives you that you can put somewhere else. Incredible card. If you can... Now, Jabba, I think, is a somewhat high-skill leader in that deck building is and drafting is very important for him. If you just put Jabba in a deck where his leader flip isn't going to do anything, he's probably not actually great. You need to get there on Sentinels and Ambush, I think. But if you do, I think he can compete with Leia pretty easily. Yularen competes with Leia by just being faster. If Leia doesn't draft any of those restore units, Chuchi or the sponsors, or she doesn't draft enough Sentinels, even if she drafts Sentinels, honestly, because those often come out a little bit later. Yularen just goes fast, especially Yularen Red. I think that's the pretty definitively best version of Yularen for draft. It's just the fastest. Yularen is pretty clearly kind of one of the aggro decks that you should be looking out for. Mon Mothma's the controversial one. I think I value her a little bit more than most people. I think a lot of people would have the tier 2 deck have Sly Moore or maybe Sabe instead of Mon Mothma. I think those are a tiny bit below these 4, but I'm sympathetic to the fact that Mon Mothma might be the worst of these 4, just because she doesn't really have an ability. The official ability comes up sometimes, the fact that other friendly officials get +0/+1, but really it's just you play it so that you can deck fix. And her stats are good. I mean, 5 for a 3/7, that was Talzin's stats, but Talzin also had a really good ability. So this beats Leia by just kind of having better card quality because you can play more units, but honestly, this is probably the weakest of the tier 2 leaders, and I am sympathetic to moving it down a little bit. And then Deidre kind of beats Leia by being out 2 turns before. If you're playing Deidre, your goal should be to go as fast as possible, and you probably aren't going to be able to win by Leia's flip turn, but you should be basically set up for a really easy win that turn or the next turn. You should be going fast in Deidre. So definitely keep that in mind. And Deidre Green is where you usually want to be. That way you have access to both of the 3/3s, and that's a great start for any deck, but especially an aggro fast deck like Deidre. And then Slimore and Sabe I won't talk about quite as much, but I think that they're also contenders. If you're playing a leader outside of these 7, I think that you are putting yourself at kind of a bit of a disadvantage. There's things you can do with Luthen. Maybe there's something you could do with Palpatine. I played against someone who was very convinced that they could make Dryden work, and I am a little sympathetic to that too, but you really do need to get there, I think, for the Dryden thing to work. That's probably a little bit hard, and maybe you have to be a better player than I am to do it. But I think really you should be looking to play these 7, and especially, Leia, Jabba, Yularen, Deidre, and maybe Mon Mothma, depending on if the officials package is there. Mon Mothma is kind of what you play if there's nothing clear open, because everything's open when you're playing Mon Mothma. You'll see a slight villain bias here, and that is creating an interesting dynamic. If you look around and you see a bunch of people trying to do Leia, you can get a crazy villain deck probably. But also, you have to keep in mind that if people aren't playing Leia, there's a really high chance they're going to be playing a villain leader. So definitely an interesting dynamic, and I will keep that in mind if I qualify for the draft in the next PQ I attend. Hopefully. We'll see. So you'll see here I have Satine with a bunch of question marks after it. You're probably wondering about that. Allow me to elaborate. Someone top 8'd the draft. Sorry, let me rephrase that. Someone in the top 8 draft at the PQ I was at this past weekend had Satine, and they won the top 8 and got to quarterfinals, and they almost won the quarterfinals. The game was close. It was Satine Green, and there are a couple of interesting things I want to talk about here. So in my set review, I probably gave Satine a pretty bad grade, and I think that I could be forgiven for doing so. you basically don't really have a leader unit. And in a game, and a format especially, where leader flip is like, that should be your turn, right? You're getting this free big unit, and maybe you also get to plot something to get even more value in one go, right? Like this is like the leader flip is big. And now you're flipping a leader that doesn't really do the thing. You know, it can't put pressure on your opponents. That's why I gave Satine a bad grade. And before I get into why Satine is maybe a little better than I thought, I should say I still don't think you should play Satine. In a top 8 draft especially, there are going to be a lot of people in blue heroism, because Leia's in blue heroism. And so this probably won't be particularly open, even though no one will be playing this specific leader. I don't think it'll be super open. But I can see a world that maybe I wouldn't have been able to see a couple months ago, where you maybe actually want to play Satine. And the reason for that is because I should be a little bit careful about that. I don't think you should play Satine in 99% of cases. But it's not bad if you're able to build your deck in such a way that your units require 2 hits from your opponents to finish off anyway. Let's say you're playing Chandralyn Sponsors, the 2 cost 2/3 restore 2. Great card, we know this. And your opponent also plays that, or they play some other 2/3, right? You can start just going, or if your opponent decides they want to start trading into your good 2/3, it's going to be way harder for them to do that than previously expected. Let's say they play a 2/3 and they expect to finish it off with Jabba's ability, or force you to attack back into it, right? So they attack your 2/3 with theirs. You're both left with 2/1 in stats. Your action, you use Satine's ability, heal 2, ping your base for 2. Now you have a full health unit again. So you have a bunch of options. You can either just send it into base and restore the 2 that Satine just dealt to base. You can send it into your opponent's unit, and now Jabba's ability is no longer online. It can't ping yours, and the next turn you can just heal it again with Satine anyway. And then all that damage you're putting on your base, she has restore 4. That's a lot. So it puts your opponent in kind of this weird position where, in some sense, you can kind of ignore her, but in another sense, she's a must kill, right? If you can restore 4 on your base every turn and just have your opponent ignore that, you're probably going to win that game, right? Like, the amount of outracing that your opponent would need to do is ridiculous. Now, if you're playing Satine, you need to have a plan for the opponent, the enemy leader, right? Because oftentimes what happens is leaders kind of trade into each other somewhat. So the plan for that could be retaliation. The plan for that could be you just have some big efficient unit. The plan for that, I guess, could be putting equipment on Satine, but that's a little awkward. I don't think you should do this, but it's definitely something that you should give a little bit more respect to, I think, the Satine leader. I think that I probably gave her like a D-. She's probably closer to like a D, maybe a D+. So that'll be an interesting one to talk about in cards I was most wrong about. Even when I watched him drafting that, because he was sitting beside my teammate, I was thinking, that's insane. This is not going to work. There's no way. But he beat Leia Red in round 1 in the top 8. And then in round 2, the quarterfinals, he was against my teammate, and he almost won. It was and my teammate is a very good player. Like I know that personally. So the fact that he almost won is definitely not negligible. I should stop talking about this. I just sort of wanted to share that because I had a good laugh whenever I saw this leader getting played and winning, and I hope you do too. But maybe we shouldn't be laughing. Maybe we should be paying our respects because this is cool. It's very cool. So lessons learned. Just as a quick summary, we'll wrap the video up. Out of aspect, Beguile is better than I expected it to be, and I expected it to be all right. So definitely will be keeping that in mind in the future. Probably not going to be pack one, pick one-ing it, unless I'm really sure that I can play it in yellow, then maybe. But it's definitely something that I will consider out of aspect. Grassroots Resistance, which is the Lightning Helix effect, is definitely a card that is, I think, a little bit undervalued right now, but for maybe a good reason. It's a card that I could definitely see siding out in some matches, but I think I like having the first copy and maybe a second copy, depending on the match, just because removal is removal, and we need that. Defense Fleet X-Wing is bad. It's worse than I thought. That's the 1/4 Space Sentinel. Nimble Prowess is something that you should always expect from your opponent, because it doesn't really hurt their curve that much, right? If they're on 5 resources, they can do Nimble Prowess and a 4-drop, and that's honestly a better turn than playing a 5-drop. arguably, because your biggest thing is now tapped down. They still have a pretty sizable threat, and now their slightly smaller threat is bigger too. Yeah, Nimble Prowess, it feels like action cheating, even though it's not really action cheating. It does feel like it. So definitely don't sleep on that one. Don't play it out of aspect, though. And then some cards are good because they're good into Leia. And the three I put on the screen here, these cards are fine on their own. Retaliation maybe less so, but the cards are good on their own, but they're especially good into Leia. Junior Senator, the 2 cost 3/2. I was almost tempted to play Leia yellow because I had 2 copies of Junior Senator. The fact he trades cleanly into the 3/3s, the fact that he can remove the Leia effect, making your opponent go down on a resource and an action just kind of for free, and the fact that he can actually hit some of the played plot equipment, right? The 0+0/+3 he hits. I guess diplomatic relations, the +2/+2, that's not a plot equipment, but he hits that. There's a lot of good stuff that this guy can do, and he's especially good into Leia, which is why I put him on the slide here. And then Retaliation is good into Leia because it cleans up Leia, right? It kills other leaders too, but honestly, Leia is the biggest one that you need to be concerned about killing. Because of all the leaders in this format, Leia is she pretty much is the only good one that flips on 6, right? There isn't really another good leader that flips on 6 in this format. And so she is the biggest leader when she flips, so having Retaliation feels like trading up and is fine into her, whereas it's not great elsewhere. And then Beguile is good just because, if it prevents a Leia player from dumping a bunch of experience onto one unit. So those are my thoughts and lessons that I will be taking into the next PQ. So thank you so much for watching. I also want to say massive shout out to the developers. This has been a really fun set for Limited. There's been a lot of cool dynamics going on. I like all of the things you need to consider. I think Disclose is a very fun mechanic, and I like that there are cards, Garinden being the best example, that sort of reward you for paying attention to what your opponent discloses. Honestly, there could be more cards that make you pay attention to what your opponent discloses. I think that's cool. I think that's neat game design, and I think overall this set it's been a fun one. So I'm very much looking forward to doing more drafts casually and also at PQs. So hopefully I've learned enough to do better at the next one and actually make the top 8. So thank you so much for tuning in. This video went a little longer than I was expecting, but I hope you enjoyed. I hope you learned something. I certainly did. And as always, may the Force be with you.
So what I told you was true, from a certain point of view.
A certain point of view?